Welcome to our Kaya Live tonight. It's so nice to have you join us. We've had so many great questions come through. I hope I can get through them all. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Amanda. I'm a doctor of Chinese medicine and I have a women's health clinic in Paran. I've been practicing for 15 years now, and my passion lies in women's health, fertility, pregnancy. And so let's kick it off. Uh, our body essentially is a feedback system. So every month our menstrual cycle arrives as women. And when we have a period, it basically means that our body is meeting its baseline of basic health. And for us women, it is our fifth vital sign. So we have four vital signs in our body. That means that we're basically alive and ticking on. It's our respiratory rate, our heart rate, our blood pressure, and also our temperature. And so what happens is if we stop having a period is that it indicates that our body is gone into survival mode. So not much has really changed. Our body is still our brain is still part of that reptilian brain. And the reptilian brain was about survival, procreation, and hunting and gathering. And so when our body's in a very stressed state, it shuts down its biological feedback system. And for women, it's a positive biological feedback that shuts our menstrual cycle down. And so we stop having a period. And so if we're training and overtraining, is that a lot of the time it's our menstrual cycle that disappears. And so this is a really good indication for us as women to really kind of understand if we can train effectively throughout our cycle. And just to break that down, we have 4 phases in our menstrual cycle. We have menstruation, that's the amount of days that we bleed for. We have our follicular phase, and this is where we start to grow a dominant follicle. It's also the time where our body's producing estrogen. It helps to grow an endometrial lining. This is the time within our cycle that we start to feel amazing. I call it, it's like our angel wings come out. We're like, oh, I feel great again. And of course, then we come into ovulation, and ovulation is the time where it's our most fertile window, and we want to be more social, we want to be more engaging, we feel like we have more energy. And then we come into our luteal phase, and our luteal phase is that last part of our cycle where we start to notice things start to slow down, we start to crave more foods, we feel tired, we feel sluggish, PMS may start to arise. And then we go into our period again. And so as women, we're really cyclical beings, and we tend to follow the lunar cycle. So make note of that. That's a great one, to follow the moon, and just to see if you ovulate around the new moon or the full moon, or whether you bleed around the new moon and the full moon. And so a question was, what is the optimal time to be training throughout my cycle? This is a really great one. So as women, it's time that we start to really learn to tune into our bodies. So our body's always communicating with us, to us what it needs. It's just whether we're actually taking that time to listen. So when we're bleeding, is the body's, in Chinese medicine, the body is losing blood, it's losing qi, so it's losing energy. And when we're losing energy, we naturally want to slow down. It's the time that we come into our yin phase. And yin is about slowing down, it's nourishing, it's nurturing. So if we're losing energy and blood, is that what we need to do is we need to replenish that. And so throughout our menstrual cycle, throughout our bleed, is that particularly on those days that you're having a heavy bleed, you want to really minimize your training. It's like waking up in the morning, asking your body an internal inventory. Do I need to train today? And most of the time your body will say no, and you know the answer too. And so instead, enjoy the sleep in. It's really a time for self-care, so you can start to prepare your body and hormones to optimize so you can thrive throughout the rest of your cycle by having that adequate rest. And that also means eating foods that are going to support that loss of energy, so glucose, because the endometrial lining actually changes if we don't conceive, and so it changes into glucose spirals, and that's why we naturally crave carbohydrates. You're like, why do I want the sugar? Why do I want the carbs? Well, that's why, because the body's preparing to lose energy as it sheds the endometrial lining, which is our menstrual blood. And so if you can honor that time and take like journal, have a bath, go for a walk instead, be outside in nature, connect to the things that make you feel grounded and the things that nourish you. And of course, as I mentioned, eating foods that are really supportive, slow cooked meals, bone broth, vegetarian broth. And also too, you want to be eating foods that are high in B vitamins to be able to support that loss of menstrual blood so you can replenish. And then of course, as I mentioned before, we come into that second part, our follicular phase. So this is the time, ladies, that you cannot miss your dead squats. Do not miss a leg day, okay? Is that when we produce estrogens, it's like we come out of our menstrual cycle, we're finished bleeding. Also too, you just naturally can feel tired. It's almost, in Chinese medicine, the liver releases the blood. And so if you're getting kind of irritable, the blood lets go, all of a sudden you're like, oh my God, I feel amazing again. So you put on your angel wings, you're like, yep, I'm ready, I'm feeling good. So this is the time that you really want to be optimizing your training, is throughout your follicular phase into ovulation. Because also too, estradiol is a steroid hormone. And so it's also shown that women that train in their follicular phase tend to have a higher strength capacity as well. So you'll find that you're actually producing more energy as well because of the hormone estrogen. Hormone estrogen is a growth hormone. So if you think about when we went through puberty, we're growing breast tissue, our reproductive organs are developing in terms of like getting our menstrual cycle ready. So this is the optimal time. And then leading up to ovulation as well. But for those that are trying to conceive, is that you don't want to be smashing it out in your luteal phase. I think, ancient wisdom has been forgotten, is that our womb is a sacred space. And so our womb, once we've conceived, is we want to keep this space open. So it's like no abdominal crunches. The uterus in Western medicine is also described as a non-essential organ. So if we're out there smashing it, pounding the paveway, running, doing HIIT classes, is that all the blood diverts away from our uterus to feed our quadriceps, the big muscle groups that require that extra energy. It's also too, it's like the mitochondria have to feed the muscle groups for that ATP energy and that conversion. And so you want to just be making sure in that luteal phase that you really check in, and instead of doing a HIIT class, just do a yoga class. Do a Pilates class, but without any abdominal crunches, and really just slow it down. Because the more you start to optimize your body throughout your menstrual cycle with the foods that you eat, the lifestyle choices you make, going to bed a little bit earlier, coming off your phone at night, reading a book instead, meditating, practicing mindfulness, is that you're actually going to optimize your hormones so you come into flow. And I mean, those days when you wake up and you're like, boom, I'm rocking it. I feel good in my body, I feel good in my skin. Is that is just reflective because your hormones are actually in a harmonious balance and they're in their good cyclical rhythm, because our body is in an internal rhythm. It has its own rhythm. So it's about finding your rhythm, ladies. And what does your rhythm look like? How is your period every month? How much do you need to train? Do you need to cut it back? Because also too, if we produce the hormone cortisol, right? So cortisol serves its purpose. A little bit of stress is actually good, because when we have that healthy stress, is that it motivates us. But when we're in constant stress, which goes back to that reptilian brain, but now we're living in a modern world where there's just daily stresses rather than having to run from that saber-tooth tiger, is that constant stress starts to put a neuroephedrine, I can never pronounce that right, and then also cortisol. And constant cortisol, if we're training a lot, we start to produce cortisol, more cortisol, more cortisol. And what that does is it starts to shut down our biological feedback system, coming into a negative feedback rather than a positive. Gut health starts to suffer. The adrenals are impacted. Mental health suffers. Our mood suffers. And so when we're in high cortisol, there's no way you can lose weight either, because your body's in its stress state. So it's in a holding state. Why is it trying to hold? Because it's in survival mode. So you can, there was a question that came through, can I lose weight throughout my cycle? Yes, you can, if you optimize your training throughout your cycle rather than training just to lose weight. And so much of that comes down to food. It's really about the right nutrition. If you have the right nutrition, you can actually lose weight without even training, because we see this so much in clinic, because women come out of that stress response into parasympathetic. And parasympathetic is rest and digest. And when it's in this state, it's receptive. It finds its own rhythm again. And so naturally the aldosterone, another good one, that balances, it's produced from the adrenal cortex, right? But that produces the balance between sodium and potassium within the body. And so if there's too much of that, the body goes into swelling and into holding. And that's because the adrenals are having to work hard, because there's too much cortisol and the neuroephedrine in the body. And so if we can start to pull it back, it's pretty simple. Think of your body as a bank account. What are you putting into your body? What's your output? Is your output more than your input? And a really great way to do this is to write down in your diary, input, output, and then to see if your days are so much more output than input. And a lot of the time you'll find that you're living in the red zone, the output, rather than the input. So it's a really good way to just kind of like, I like to say, what's that word? You're doing an audit, a life audit, that's right. Do a life audit. Go in, check out everything in your lifestyle. What do you need to kind of change? Because so much of us as women live in this yang. It's about, we put more into doing more. Whereas like if we can actually subtract that and come back into a state of being, it's also too, then we can start to understand the inner workings of our body and our hormonal fluctuations, what our body needs, what our body doesn't need, what it gravitates to, what it gravitates away from. And it's like, the perfect example I use is when you walk into a room and you just can feel the energy. It's like your body's saying to you, I don't feel right here. And it's very much the same with our bodies on a daily basis. It's just taking that time to listen. So instead of tuning into this, tune into your body. Start to learn to tap into its intuition. Okay, I'm going to come back with another question.